Hello, I'm Paul Haswell,
And I'm Thomas Ho.
and we're here this week to talk about the coronavirus, something we hoped would have gone away by now, but it seems to be just getting started. How are you coping, Thomas?
By wearing a face mask to most places and trying to live life as usual.
It's weird. Here in Hong Kong, and things seem like they're almost back to normal in many ways, just that absolutely everybody is wearing a face mask. But if you're listening to this somewhere else, certainly I was on a video conference yesterday with people in London, and they were laughing at me because I appeared basically looking like a very low-rent surgeon from a really bad TV drama, because they're just not wearing masks. And I even spoke to some colleagues in Singapore who said that generally, unless you're ill, you aren't wearing a mask. So Hong Kong, and I guess mainly mainland China, is perhaps at the moment unique in that everyone, if you see someone in not a mask, you look at them almost suspiciously.
Well, I mean, Hong Kong has had the experience of SARS some years ago, and from my memory of it, this was exactly how people responded for SARS. It was hand sanitizer, it was masks. So people have had practice in Hong Kong, and they're putting that practice into action right now for coronavirus.
Yeah, and touch wood, it seems to be working. I mean, the number of cases is fairly static, and you look at the explosions of new cases in Europe, and in the US now. And Tom Hanks, I saw today.
Yes, from Australia.
Yes.
Caught it in Australia, I saw, yeah.
Yeah, so that if Tom Hanks can get it, anyone can get it. That's something to be
That
taken
is
away
quite scary, yeah. But that's a good point you've made. I did notice the numbers sort of at the early days. Hong Kong was, I think, second or third in the world after mainland China. And then as a result of recent events, it's just been overshadowed by Italy, by Iran, by Korea, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's not a race, and we're glad we're not winning it, frankly. So let's hope that continues. Hope when you're listening to this, there's been no massive spike in cases. But what we want to talk about is the technology industry in various elements to it, how it's impacted by the coronavirus, and what we think will be the trends as this thing doesn't seem to be going away. Now, one of my inspirations for this was I am actually so you, Thomas, big gamer, big fan of computer games. And for those who are interested, Doom Eternal is out any minute now. I think we got weeks ago.
Ooh, it's late March, isn't it? So
I think it's a week
I've
on
been quite
Friday.
busy working, as you know, so I haven't been sort of glued.
You've been doing the work while I've been reading the previews and waiting patiently. But I noticed that the big entertainment expo has been cancelled, as is most events now, seemingly across the world. Almost everything, it seems, has been cancelled.
Well, including our own tech conference, which is supposed to be happening tonight, but no longer.
That's true. When we're recording this, it would be happening in just a couple of... We'd have been at the venue now, getting ready. We were trendsetters for that. We cancelled it before it became fashionable, but there we go. Not something we'll be fashionable about. But I'm curious what the impact is on tech. Now, let's do the law bit a bit. The technology contracts. A lot of people have been talking about force majeure. And basically whether, if you've got a technology contract, are you now hamstrung by the fact that we've got this virus issue? And some people are almost hoping that it's an easy win to get out of a contract that isn't perhaps profitable just by quoting force majeure. Now, do you think that is actually the case? Do you think that works?
It really depends on the contract, because unlike civil law systems where force majeure, I mean, it's not even an English word, is it? So it comes from civil law, and civil law will give you a bit more prescription as to what the word means. But under common law systems such as Hong Kong, such as the UK, such as Australia, such as Singapore, force majeure doesn't actually have a clearly codified or defined meaning to it. I mean, there's a bit of case law on it, but usually when you see a force majeure clause, it's quite specifically defined in the contract.
You've got acts of war, occasionally an act of God, often industrial action, but it's rare. In fact, I don't think I've seen it very often at all, maybe because I haven't been looking at any contracts from 1910. It's rare that they have things like plague or epidemic or something that might fall within what's going on with the coronavirus crisis.
I mean, it really depends on how the clause is constructed. If it says act of war and earthquakes and all the rest of it, I guess the first question is that exhaustive? Are there events that will be captured by this clause which aren't actually included in this clause? And you will look towards like including, for example, which would sort of imply that the events listed were only examples.
Yeah, the thing is, it's so often when you're negotiating a force majeure clause, if you're the people who are buying the software, buying the hardware, buying the product, you want to limit the reasons for which the other side can get out of delivering it. Often you're not as concerned about limiting whether you have to pay for it. Your view is if they can't deliver, then you don't pay. Similar basic contract principles would apply. So I think a lot of people are stuck, and I think a lot of tech providers are going to find themselves in difficult situations where they may not be able to deliver what they're supposed to deliver, but they may not have a force majeure provision they can rely on.
The other thing about these force majeure provisions, I suppose, is, and I saw this on the internet, I think it was a newspaper article which referred to, quote unquote, an obscure legal clause that people might use because of coronavirus. And this, quote unquote, obscure legal clause was force majeure.
Oh, really? So people don't read them anymore.
Well, there you go. I then read the comments on the article, which is seldom a good idea. But one person...
no, never read the comments.
Yeah, but one person basically just wrote and said, force majeure isn't obscure. And I sort of agree with that, but then it raises a point, which is that a force majeure clause can almost be boilerplate. It may or may not be there, but if it's there, it's something that people might not turn their minds to necessarily. And I suppose you could actually get through a career without ever having to, subject to your luck and subject to your timing, ever having to rely on a force majeure clause, ever.
Yeah, I agree. I have to admit, it's rare that when you're in a contract negotiation, you spend a lot of time on a force majeure clause. I bet that's changing now. I bet people are all amending it to put in plague and epidemic and who knows what else, famine, pestilence, just plug in the 4 horsemen and hope for the best. But it is very boilerplate. It's one of those things you don't read. It's a good lesson for contract drafters to be a bit more aware that something completely unexpected. I mean, if you'd asked me back in October, November that we would be facing the situations we're facing now in the world, something completely unexpected can throw your contract off guard. And if you haven't prepared for it, then you're stuck with the common law if you're here in a common law jurisdiction and whatever you've written down.
Well, that's it. And I suppose the common law would also have a few things to say about the coronavirus, because when we talk about force majeure, the very similar concept from common law, which is often raised to us, is frustration.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a question as to whether frustration can apply to something like this. But again, I don't think the answer is a clear yes. It would really depend on the exact contract, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Now, I've seen the different ways that tech contracts can be affected. So distribution contracts, I think, are the ones that are suffering the most. And now normally these will have some sort of target, a sales target for the distributor to meet. And of course, nobody will meet anybody. So if they're trying to do sales, it becomes almost impossible for them. And I have had people asking me, can we invoke force majeure? And so send me the clause, and of course there's no mention. It's going to be quite difficult for them. I would hope, I mean, remember, contracts aren't written in stone as much as lawyers might like to say they are. I would hope that whoever you're contracting with might be a bit more generous and say, well, I'll give you an extension of time to meet these targets, given the fact that so many people are trapped in their houses or buildings or doing whatever. But you never know. It depends entirely on your contracting party. You may say, well, we desperately need this revenue because nobody else is making any money because we're so quiet. So it is, I think if you're in that sphere, it's difficult. But what if it's something else? What if it's a pure software delivery contract, an outsourcing contract? Then I would have thought you wouldn't really be affected. I mean, the issue with the virus is it's your human capital, the people in your business who are affected. But you'd think that the software, the hardware, everything like that should be static and should still operate.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because when we look at using a force majeure clause, we'd usually want to say, because X has happened, we can therefore, suspend our obligations for some time while X is happening.
Yeah.
And one very important part of being able to say that is actually to show that X has then caused whatever difficulties you have. So if you were talking about something that was purely remote, that even on a normal day would not require, say, face-to-face contact, then I think you might have a slightly harder time to say, actually, coronavirus has directly caused me to be unable to do so and so.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I can see be an issue is where you have KPIs and SLAs if something goes wrong. So normally if there's a defect in the system or you're suffering some downtime, your response times might be affected if they're reliant on an individual. But that individual may not necessarily be someone who then has to get in his car or on a bus or on a train, travel to the affected site. Maybe all be done remotely. And again, as long as that person's making it to the remote location, and I always have this vision of a poor sort of system engineer just sitting on his own, very lonely, watching YouTube videos, waiting for something to happen, which isn't that far from the truth for a lot of the people I know who work on these projects, then surely that should be okay.
I agree.
Now, one of the big challenges, coronavirus pretty much kicked off in China, and has seen a massive disruption in the technology supply chain. I was reading today that a lot of the manufacturers, so this ranges, I'm back to games again, the manufacturer of the new PlayStation, the PS5, the new Xbox, they're all wondering whether they'll actually be able to reach demand for the big sales period, which will probably be in November. Similarly, the new iPhone was being touted today. I was reading some of the Mac news sites, but there's a doubt whether that will actually make it to market because the factories just aren't operating. They've been shut down essentially for a few months. They're only really just back in action.
Well, I mean, that's another dimension to it, isn't it? It's not just the virus itself, but also the government response to the virus. Some of these factories couldn't open because the government won't let them open.
Yeah.
And that could be another reason why you're unable to meet your obligations, because there's policy in place, there's regulations in place that dictate what you must do in response to the virus.
And you may find that force majeure works there, but the problem is that won't help you. I mean, okay, fine if you had an obligation, but you couldn't meet it because your factory was closed down by the government. But what if it's just your sales for that particular year? What if you're hoping? I mean, Apple probably can afford to lose a bit of cash every now and then. But if you're basing your future on a new product which is no longer available and can't be obtained, this is a real problem. I think hardware is the real area where the tech industry is going to struggle because of this, because people won't get easy access to hardware. We may see something, you may remember this is a bit nerdy, the floods in Thailand a few years ago, which pushed the prices of hard drives through the roof. I don't know. Maybe I'm far too nerdy.
I wasn't getting a hard drive at that time, so I don't think it affected me.
I think I was for some unknown reason, but that was something that seemed so remote but caused such an impact on the tech industry. It took a while for the prices to recover. I wonder whether you find the same issues now with components or devices made in China. I don't know.
Well, to be honest, I would like to think that some people in the supply chain, some people involved in this, have had a little bit of practice already because of all the trade war issues that were happening last year. I mean, not that any of it's good, but at least there's
resilience.
Some sort of preparedness.
Yeah. So adverse consequences build a certain level of resilience. I would agree with that. But there are a few negatives for the tech sector. I think of all of the industries to survive, tech is the one who's probably going to be able to deal with this most easily. But I wonder whether it actually presents more opportunities. So if you're like Thomas and I, or many other people all over the world, you will have spent a few weeks working from home, or you will be about to spend a few weeks working from home if you're on those locations where the virus is just starting to kick off. And that puts a massive strain on an individual and a business's technology capabilities. Now, we were thankfully fairly lucky. We've got a pretty strong system of VPNs. We could essentially work from our homes as if we were in the office. There was no big change. Plenty of others are complaining that's not the case. When you're doing, I saw shares in Zoom are going up in terms of people using that for video conferencing. But I wonder whether this is now creating a massive opportunity to essentially almost impacting on the way we all do work in the future.
Well, you say shares in Zoom are going up. I heard some good things about Netflix having a strong quarter as well. So maybe not everyone's actually working from home.
No, maybe the two aren't entirely independent of each other. That's true.
But I think that is a good point. An incident like this could really accelerate people in terms of their thinking of their capabilities for working remotely. There's a general push towards things like agile working in any event.
Now, I'll be a cynic. There are many who think the push to agile working is just to try and save some office space. But rather than actually you're thinking about the bottom line, rather than actually trying to make lives more easy for people. Now, I don't agree. I'm one of those people who thinks that if you have laptop, have phone, will travel, you can be anywhere in the world, and if you need to do something, you can do it, and it gives an amazing sense of freedom. But what about those people who are very cynical, are just seeing this as an opportunity? Well, we only need an office now with 4 chairs. We can send all of our 200 people and they can work at home using their own systems. They can make their own coffee, whatever it is, whatever other expenses you have when a person's office, have their own heating on.
I think it really just depends on the whole culture of the place, doesn't it? And it's a bit of good faith on the part of both the employee, me, and the employer, you.
Yeah, exactly.
And on the one hand, if you're working from home, you're trusted to be responsible enough to do the right thing. And of course, as the employer, the employees also look to you to think that, well, you're not just doing this for cynical reasons. You're doing this because, number one, there's a real business need for it in terms of dealing with things like, well, what we're dealing with right now in terms of coronavirus. But then also because it enables people to, I hesitate to use the cliched word work-life balance, but to really respond to things happening in their personal lives, respond to unexpected things, to essentially preserve the mode of working despite what life might throw at you.
Exactly. If you've had the misfortune of being a trainee lawyer, say 10 to 20 years ago, you'll be familiar with presenteeism, where your boss assumes if you are not sitting in the office, then you are clearly skiving off somewhere. That actually just encouraged people to skive off. Certainly when I was a trainee, I had a boss who wouldn't let me leave the office until after 8 p.m. And you came up with this strategy of ways to get out of the office without him knowing you'd left. So you'd get a big box of files, put your bag and coat under the files, and walk out pretending you were carrying files to somewhere else, and then vanish into the night, which is ridiculous. I mean, the lengths we would go to. And I'd like to think now there's a lot more trust. Most employers know where their employees are, wherever they are in the world, know that they can rely on them. I mean, most of us, we hiring smart people. We trust them to do their jobs. And technology should be enabling that. So I wonder whether we will see a massive boost in essentially building a home office for your individual employees.
It's been tried with, again, some technology organizations, and not saying one size fits all, but I can think of some examples where the office is extremely decentralized. I think GitHub is a fairly good example.
Yeah.
Where people essentially don't have to come into the office, but then
some of them
they
have
remain
never seen
productive.
each other. Yeah, some of them rarely ever have to see each other, which depending on your fellow employees might be a blessing or a curse. I don't know.
It just depends on on what works for your organization, right? I can imagine organizations where that sort of model will not function at all, but in GitHub's case, that seems to work for them.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I do think it's the future. Will we find, as we are finding at the moment, a period where people don't meet? I was reading an article in the FT. Is this the end of face-to-face meetings from now on? Will we always be meeting over video conference? Will everything we do? I mean, think of how phone calls have been. How often do you actually get a work phone call these days? It's so rare. In fact, any phone call, I generally know if anyone's phoning me, it has to be my mum or a telemarketer. It's one or the other, because nobody ever picks up the phone. People always email. People always instant message. They always use WhatsApp or WeChat. I wonder if we're going to see this now happen in terms of personal meetings, where technology doesn't really require us to be actually anywhere.
I think it might encourage people to sort of think deeply about whether a face-to-face meeting is necessary, when you can just basically hop on Skype or Cisco or whatever you use to then have that meeting. But at the same time, I would say that there's a lot of value to meeting someone face-to-face.
Oh, I agree.
A handshake, really goes a long way.
Well, you don't have to handshake. You can do it the sort of Vulcan, the old Mr. Spock
live long
symbol,
and
live long and
prosper.
prosper. You can do that. It's a sort of elbow bump. What else? There's been all sorts of various things. Curtsying, that would work.
But I think the point remains, sometimes you do need a face-to-face meeting. I mean, we've both been in negotiations where we've done it, via teleconferencing, but then we've also had ones that we've done just across a meeting room or at the same table.
And it's much easier when you. I mean, I'm now, despite saying I'm pro tech, it is much easier when you're in the same room to read someone and build up a rapport. But then maybe that's because I'm an old fuddy-duddy and not a millennial. Therefore, I'm not used to doing.
Well, I'm
everything
a
online.
millennial, and I think there's a very, very human element to all of this, and technology gets you 90% of the way, but that last 10% is talking to someone as if they were a person.
Now, if technology leads the way and we're not meeting because this whole virus scare has put us in a position where essentially nobody wants to be in the same room, does that not then leave us open to being replaced by AI and robots? If you're never seeing a person in person, is there a danger that this will accelerate the push towards AI?
So, in other words, you could be talking to a lawyer, but you don't know whether you're talking to a chatbot.
Yeah, exactly. Virtual lawyers.
Well, again, there's that last 10%, isn't there? The human bit of the interaction.
We're talking about lawyers, remember?
I just sort of think that sort of when an AI gets involved, let's say in what we do, they can do a lot of the things that we find exhausting to do. For example, the heavy lift in terms of legal research, in terms of reviewing clauses in a contract, It's all very well to automate all of that, but a lot of what we do is about judgment calls as well.
Yeah.
And data is important. Data is liberating. It can help you form a better decision. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to put your finger on all of the parameters that will help you form that decision. And I think a human could do a very good job of that.
Yeah, I agree. And we're a long way away, despite as much as I love the Terminator movies and worry about the rise of Skynet, we're a long way away from AI replacing human interactions, which I think may be a topic for another time. Maybe we should talk about AI next time.
Yeah, we could. I mean, there's a lot to discuss in that respect in terms of the issues that we're facing, the regulatory wave that's coming, I would say.
We've just, Thomas and I contributed to a Pinsent Mason's report, which is AI in financial services, and I'll place a link under wherever I put this podcast, so you can have a read of that. And maybe that's something for us to talk about in a week or two, because I do think that this whole, I won't call it apocalypse, but corona apocalypse is probably the best way to put it, will accelerate the rollout of technology. Will try and make us no longer reliant on having to be in one place, and I think AI may see a bit of a boost. Certainly, in the finance sector, there's a massive move towards using AI tools, and there are both advantages and some pretty hefty disadvantages as well. The disadvantages aren't just robots taking over the world. Just so you know, I'm not being paranoid.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a fair enough way of perceiving it.
Indeed. Anyway, wherever you are in the world listening to this, I hope you are staying safe. Wear a mask. Don't shake hands with someone. I don't know what all the other requirements are. Use hand sanitizer.
Wash your hands for 20 seconds.
20 seconds, and they recommend singing a song while you do it so that you spend the full time. So there we go. But do stay safe. We will be back probably in a week or two. And I think, yes, we will talk about AI. But thank you very much for listening. I think our conclusion is that tech industry, minor impact, but not huge. I don't think it's the end of the world. If you're hardware based, you've got some challenges. But I think in terms of solutions, the world is very much your oyster. Anyway, I was Paul Haswell.
And I was Thomas Ho.
And that's it from us. Look forward to speaking to you all again very soon.